Some names and details in this story have been changed for anonymity and confidentiality. Not all photographs are from the actual scene.
On August 26, 2016, at 10:43 in the morning, in the deepest part of the Focaccia Strand swamps in Florida, volunteers saw something that made them cut off their boat's engine and freeze in horror in the middle of a dense mangrove forest. 46-year-old Catherine Jones stood submerged in dark water up to her neck. The woman, who had disappeared without a trace along with her daughter 12 days earlier, did not respond to the rescuer's shouts and did not try to move. Her skin was pale as chalk. Her eyes were fixed on one point, and she had a wide, unnatural smile on her face, smile that even the insects invading her face could not erase. There was no one else near her. 24-year-old Amy Jones, who was with her mother on the day she disappeared, had vanished without a trace into the Everglades wilderness. August 14, 2016. In the state of Florida was abnormally hot, even for the local climate. The thermometer showed 95 degrees Fahrenheit at 10 in the morning, and the humidity made every breath a difficult test. U.S. Route 41, better known as the Tamiami Trail, cut through the Big Cypress National, preserved like a hot scar on the body of a green abyss. 6-year-old Catherine Jones and her 24-year-old daughter, Amy, were traveling on this road that morning. According to the investigation, the women were on their way to field research. Amy Jones, a young graduate student in botany, planned to visit several remote locations for her research paper on rare orchid species. Their route was clearly planned, and the locations were marked on a map in advance. The women left their last digital trail at 9:15 in the morning. The billing data from mobile operators, which was later attached to the criminal case, recorded that it was at this time both phones last connected to a cell tower near the tourist center of Shark Valley. After that, there was absolute silence. Both devices were simultaneously turned off or destroyed, and the signal never came online again. Julie Vance, Catherine's 72-year-old mother and Amy's grandmother, was the first to raise the alarm. For 48 hours, she tried to contact her family but only heard an answering machine. On August 16th, the woman filed a missing persons report with the Miami-Dade County Police. The interrogation report recorded her saying that her daughter and granddaughter were disciplined people and never disappeared without warning. Given the specifics of the area where dozens of hikers go missing every year, the police responded immediately, launching a route check with the National Park Rangers. The Jones family's vehicle was found 28 hours after Julie's report. The black SUV was parked on a small gravel lot near the beginning of the Gator Hook Trail. This location is off the beaten path and is popular mostly with experienced hikers and wildlife photographers. The car was neatly parked, the engine was cold, and the doors were securely locked. The detective's initial inspection of the vehicle immediately ruled out a robbery. Personal belongings were clearly visible through the tinted glass in the back seat. When the officers opened the car with the duplicate keys provided by Julie, they found 2 backpacks, women's handbags with purses full of cash, bank cards, and driver's licenses in the names of Catherine and Amy Jones. The most questionable thing was Amy's expensive professional camera, which was lying on top of the bags. It seemed that the women got out of the car for just 1 minute, not planning to go far, and simply disappeared into the hot air. From August 16th to 24th, one of the largest search and rescue operations in the history of the Everglades was deployed in the Gator Hook Trail area. The search involved canine units, helicopters, and specialized teams on airboats. Dog handlers set sniffer dogs on the trail of the car. The animals confidently led the search team deep into the dense cypress forest. But after exactly 1,000 feet, they stopped at the edge of dark water. The dogs circled in place and wind, having lost their scent. The water, which covered most of the reserve, was an insurmountable obstacle for the 4-legged searchers. From the air, helicopters equipped with thermal imagers patrolled the search area in the Big Cypress National Preserve. The pilots spent hours circling the treetops, trying to capture any heat source that resembled a human body. At the same time, teams on airboats checked narrow channels and backwaters, cutting through the thick mud with powerful propellers. But the swamp was silent. The extreme heat and high alligator activity were reducing the chances of finding the women alive with each passing hour. The investigation team interviewed everyone who could have been in the area on August 14th. There was very little evidence. But one man who had been fishing nearby that morning provided some interesting information. He claimed to have seen an old green pickup truck with a camper shell, parked a few dozen yards from the Joneses' SUV. The witness did not remember the license plate, but noted that the vehicle looked dirty and shabby, as if its owner lived deep in the woods. There was no one near the pickup. Only the driver's door was open. By the end of the first week of searching, hope began to fade. Experts realized that it was almost impossible to survive in such conditions, without special equipment and water supplies for more than 3 days. Relatives were losing faith every day, and the police were preparing to reclassify the case. Everything changed on the 8th day when one of the volunteers, wading through dense bushes 2 miles from the parking lot, noticed a strange object on a tree branch that was unnaturally glistening in the sun. On August 26, 2016, the official status of the search operation, which had lasted almost 2 weeks, was changed. A dry but frightening wording appeared in internal county police documents and National Park Service reports. A transition to the body search phased out the hope of finding Catherine and Amy Jones alive. In the wilds of the Everglades, where the daytime temperature hovered steadily at 95 degrees Fahrenheit and the humidity turned lungs into water vapor was effectively zero. The relatives, who had been on duty at the operational headquarters all these days, were warned that now the rescuers would not rush to comb every yard, but would methodically check remote backwaters, where the current or predators could have dragged the remains at 10 o'clock in the morning. A group of 4 volunteers in a flat-bottomed aluminum boat entered a sector known as the Fakachi Strand. This site is located 20 miles southwest of the gravel parking lot where the missing person's car was found. Fakachi is a veritable maze of mangroves, narrow channels, and stagnant water, which the locals call the black blood of the swamp. Ordinary tourists rarely come here. It is the territory of poachers, biologists, and those who want to hide from the world. The water level here is constantly fluctuating, and the dense cypress crowns create eternal twilight. Even in the brightest afternoon, the boat's engine was running at a minimum speed, so as not to miss a single detail among the monotonous landscape of roots and mud. The volunteers, exhausted from hours of patrolling, silently scanned the coastline. At 10:43, one of the searchers, a man with 10 years of experience in rescue missions, noticed an unnatural light spot among the thick mangrove roots that went straight down into the water. The object was not moving and stood in stark contrast to the dirty green surroundings. At first, the team thought it was garbage or a dead heron tangled in the branches. But as the boat got closer, within 30 feet, it became clear that they were looking at a human being. What the rescuers saw made them turn off the engine and stand in a daze for several seconds. 46-year-old Catherine Jones stood in the middle of the muddy water, submerged up to her neck. She was in an upright position, as if she were standing on the bottom, although the depth in this place was 5 feet. Her head was barely above the surface, and her hair was tangled with river mud and algae, turning into a solid black mass. Her skin was a deadly pale shade, like wet paper, and was dotted with hundreds of red speck bite marks from mosquitoes and flies that swarmed around her. But it wasn't her physical condition that was the worst part. When the boat came close, one of the volunteers, according to the report, barely contained a scream of terror. Catherine Jones looked directly at her rescuers with wide eyes, in which there was no fear, no joy of recognition, and no plea for help. Her pupils were dilated so much that they almost completely covered the iris, turning her eyes into two black holes and a wide, completely unnatural, grotesque smile was frozen on the woman's lips. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was a spasm that bared her teeth and stretched the skin on her cheekbones to the point of breaking, giving her the appearance of a porcelain doll left in the mud. The rescuers began calling her name, but Catherine did not respond. She did not blink, did not turn her head to the sound of the voices, and did not try to lift her hands out of the water. She continued to look through the people, maintaining that terrifying expression of frozen laughter. When the two men grabbed her shoulders to pull her into the boat, they felt that her body was as tense as a stone. Her muscles were in a state of extreme hypertonicity. She didn't help the rescuers, but she didn't resist either, remaining a completely passive doll in their hands. The evacuation process took several minutes. When Catherine was laid on the bottom of the boat, it became clear how exhausted her body was. Her clothes had turned into rags. The skin on her arms and legs was wrinkled from prolonged exposure to water, and there were strange dark streaks on her wrists, the origin of which was unclear at the time. The woman did not make a single sound, even when she was given first aid, checking her pulse and breathing. The same eerie grimace did not leave her face, as if her muscles were permanently stiffened. However, the most important question hung in the stifling air above the Fakachi swamp. Where is Amy? The volunteers immediately searched the perimeter. They shouted the girl's name, shining their flashlights into the darkest corners of the thicket, hoping to see another figure in the water. The boat made several laps around the spot where Catherine was found. The search radius was instantly expanded to 5 miles. An additional crews and a helicopter were urgently dispatched to the area, but the water was empty. No trace of 24-year-old Amy Jones could be found. No backpack, no clothes, no body. Catherine was alone. She stood there in the middle of the swamp like a lonely lighthouse left by someone on purpose. The way she was positioned, facing the only possible passage for boats, suggested that she had not just been left to die, had been put on display. As the boat raced back to civilization, cutting through the waves, Catherine Jones continued to lie on the stretcher, looking up at the cloudless sky with her glassy gaze. One of the volunteers who sat next to her and held her drip later confessed to the police that he thought she was seeing something far beyond human perception. Her silence was heavier than any scream, and her frozen smile promised that the nightmare did not end with the discovery. It had only entered a new, much darker phase in the pocket of her torn pants. The rescuers felt a hard object that the investigators did not yet know about, but which could answer the question of why she was still smiling. Dear friends, before we continue to dive into this confusing and chilling story, I want to ask you for one simple but important thing. Please subscribe to the channel right now, like this video, and leave any comments below. It will only take you a few seconds, but it will be a powerful signal to YouTube's algorithms that the content is worth watching. Thanks to your activity, many more people will be able to see this video. And together we will be able to uncover even more secrets that our world hides. Thank you for your support. And now, let's get back to the investigation. Catherine Jones was rushed by medical evacuation helicopter to Miami Baptist Hospital at 2:15 in the afternoon, immediately after the boat with the volunteers reached solid ground. Her condition was assessed by doctors in the emergency room as critical, on the verge of death. The woman was immediately moved to the intensive care unit, where a team of resuscitators, dermatologists, and neurologists gathered around her. The report of the doctor on duty, which was later attached to the criminal case file as evidence number 47, described the horrific consequences of a 12-day stay in the wild. The patient was diagnosed with severe dehydration of the 4th degree. Her body had lost a critical amount of fluid, which threatened irreversible kidney failure and heart failure. The skin on the exposed areas of her body was covered with a continuous layer of insect bite sores, many of which had already festered, causing the onset of sepsis. But the physical injuries, although serious, were only a visible part of the hell Catherine went through. Most of all, the doctors had questions about the frozen grimace that the rescuers in the swamp mistook for a crazy smile. The woman's facial muscles were so tense that they could not be relaxed. Even with the help of massage or standard muscle relaxants, neurologists, after conducting a series of tests, concluded that this was not the result of a mental disorder or shock, but the consequence of a powerful chemical. The results of the detailed toxicological examination, which came to the investigator's desk 48 hours later, shocked even the experienced forensic experts at the Florida State Laboratory. A complex, professionally mixed cocktail of synthetic psychotropic drugs and unknown plant alkaloids was found in Catherine's blood. The main component of this mixture resembled scopolamine in its chemical structure. Known in the South American criminal world as devil's breath, this substance has a frightening property. It can turn an adult into an absolutely obedient doll that remains conscious and can follow simple commands, but completely loses the will to resist and the ability to remember events. However, the mixture administered to Catherine was modified. Extracts of rare neurotoxic plants that grow exclusively in the depths of the Everglades swamps were added to it. It was this specific component that caused a paralysis of the facial nerves, which forever imprinted an expression of artificial joy on her face. The doctors explained to Detective Mark Rodriguez, who led the investigation, the true horror of the situation. All this time, Catherine was probably hearing, seeing, and understanding everything. She was locked in her own body like a prison, unable to move a finger, close her eyes, or scream. Her leg muscles had atrophied so badly that it pointed to another frightening detail. She had been held in one static position, standing or sitting on her haunches, for several days without the possibility of changing her position. On August 29th, 3 days after the rescue, Catherine Jones regained consciousness for the first time. The concentration of toxins in her blood had dropped to a level that allowed her brain to regain basic cognitive function, and doctors allowed Detective Rodriguez to conduct his first brief interrogation. The officer entered the sterile room, armed with a voice recorder, hoping to get answers to the main question that had been plaguing the entire state police force. Where was Amy? But Catherine's first words dashed the investigators' hopes for a quick solution. The woman looked at the detective with a blank stare and whispered, barely audibly, that she remembered absolutely nothing. In her mind, there was a solid black hole the size of 12 days. According to the interrogation report, Catherine's last clear memory was of the moment in the Gator Hook Trail parking lot. She described how she and Amy got out of the car to check their gear before heading out on the trail. Catherine bent down to fix a shoelace, and at that moment, she felt a sharp, stinging prick in her neck, similar to a wasp or other large insect sting. She tried to straighten up and touch the prick with her hand, but the world around her instantly swam away. Sounds became deafening, as if she were under a thickness of water, and her legs gave out. Then there was only darkness, a feeling of endless falling and silence. She did not see her attacker, did not hear his voice, and did not notice any other cars nearby. Realizing that the woman was in a state of retrograde amnesia, Detective Rodriguez decided to take a chance. He pulled out a printed photo of Amy Jones's smiling girl from the same camera found in the car and showed it to Catherine. The reaction was immediate and unpredictable. The vital signs monitors beeped, recording a critical spike in heart rate to 150 beats per minute. Catherine began to choke. Her body arched on the hospital bed, and an inhuman, animalistic wheeze escaped her throat. She clutched the bed rail with her fingers white from exertion, looking at her daughter's photo with indescribable horror. Through the hysteria, which 2 nurses could barely calm down with an additional dose of sedatives, She began to repeat the same phrase like a broken record. It was not delirium. They were words that had been drilled into her subconscious through a chemical fog, the only thing her brain could retain from that period of oblivion, she whispered. Looking directly into the detective's eyes, he said he was taking what was his. He said he was taking what was his. This phrase made Detective Rodriguez freeze. It indicated that the criminal was not a random maniac and that the answer to the mystery of Amy's disappearance lay not in the swamps, but in documents that Catherine Jones would prefer to forget forever as doctors in the intensive care unit of Miami Baptist Hospital continued to fight for Catherine Jones's physical and mental recovery. The investigation into her daughter's disappearance reached a dead end. For 3 days after Catherine regained consciousness, detectives had not made any progress in finding Amy. The marshes were silent. There were no witnesses, and the only clue was strange green. Pickup truck had disappeared into the thousands of similar vehicles registered in rural Florida. However, one phrase that the woman repeated in a state of shock haunted the lead investigator. Mark Rodriguez, he said he was taking what was his. These 5 words completely changed the vector of the investigation. If this was not a random attack by a maniac, but a deliberate action to get back what was his, then the key to the solution should be sought not in the Everglades, but in the past of the Jones family itself. Rodriguez decided to temporarily leave his fieldwork and immerse himself in paper archives. The official family biography looked flawless. Catherine and her late husband were considered Amy's biological parents from the moment she was born. All of her neighbors, friends, and even Amy herself were convinced of this fact. However, the detective's intuition told him that perfect facades often hide a rotten foundation. He sent an official request to the Florida Department of Children and Families, demanding full access to any archival records relating to the Jones family name for the past 25 years. The response came 48 hours later, and its contents came as a real shock to the investigation team. Among the stacks of tax returns and medical records was a folder marked confidential and dated October 1992. When Rodriguez opened the yellowed pages, he realized that he had found the very crack in the foundation. Amy Jones was not Catherine's own daughter. According to the documents, the adoption procedure was finalized when the girl was only 11 months old. It was a so-called closed adoption, which involves the complete isolation of the child from biological relatives and the change of all metric data. The intermediary in this case was a private agency called Silver Palms Adoption. This name made the detective tense up. In the early 2000s, a loud scandal erupted around Silver Palms involving forgery, bribery, and the illegal transfer of children bypassing state queues. The agency was liquidated by court order, and its archive was partially destroyed, making the found papers a real rarity. However, the most important information was contained in the original birth certificate, a copy of which was miraculously preserved in the appendices to the case. The girl's place of birth was Homestead, and the name of the father was written in the column, Lucas Graves. Rodriguez immediately entered the name into the National Crime Information Center's criminal offense database. The computer screen instantly produced a result that made the experienced detective go cold. Lucas Graves was not just a biological father. He was a man whose fatherhood had ended in a SWAT team assault and a prison sentence. The police report of November 14, 1991, described the events of that night with a documentary dryness that hid the real horror. That evening, Homestead police received a call about domestic violence. When the officers arrived, they found 24-year-old Lucas Graves barricaded in his home. The man was in a state of extreme psychotic agitation, bordering on insanity. He was holding a hunting rifle in his hands, and next to him, his 3-month-old daughter, the future Amy Jones, was crying in a crib. For 6 hours, negotiators tried to get Graves to lay down his arms. According to the transcript of the negotiations, he refused to leave, shouting incoherent phrases about how the system wanted to steal his daughter, that they would take her to erase her memory, and that he would protect her with his life. He was convinced that social services were agents of some sinister organization. The situation escalated when Graves tried to set fire to the house, saying that he would rather burn with the child than give her up. The commander of the Special Forces Group decided to storm the house. At 4 o'clock in the morning on November 15th, the door of the house was smashed in with a battering ram. Graves put up a fierce fight. He attacked the first officer who entered the room and inflicted a serious head injury on him with the butt of his rifle. Only the use of stun guns and tear gas made it possible to neutralize the man. The child, who was miraculously unharmed in the chaos of the assault, was immediately taken away and placed under state care. The trial was quick and revealing. Lucas Graves was deprived of his parental rights and sentenced to 15 years in prison for assaulting a police officer in the line of duty, malicious disobedience, and endangering the life of a child. The girl was placed in the foster care system, from where she was taken 8 months later by Catherine Jones, who had arranged for the paperwork through a dubious agency to cut off any connection with her. Biological father Catherine did everything she could to ensure that Amy never learned of her origins, and this secret remained for almost a quarter of a century. Detective Rodriguez leaned back, looking at an old photograph of Lucas Graves attached to his prison card. The picture was taken on the day of his arrest. A broken face, a wild look filled with hatred, and a tattoo on his neck of a snake biting its own tail. The motive for the crime committed 25 years later was now on the surface. The phrase "taking what is mine" was not a metaphor. It was the fulfillment of a promise made by a mad father that night in Homestead. Rodriguez dialed the number for the State Prison System's archives to find out Graves's current status. He was hoping to hear that he had died in prison or was still behind bars. But the voice of the operator on the other end gave him information that made his blood run cold. Lucas Graves had been released early in 2008 for good behavior, and then his trail had been lost. His last known place of registration was canceled 5 years ago. Officially, this man did not exist. But the detective knew that the ghost from the past was out there somewhere at large. And he had already completed what he had failed to do 25 years ago: the dossier on Lucas Graves, which landed on Detective Mark Rodriguez's desk on September 1, 2016, resembled a chronicle of a voluntary disappearance. After his high-profile arrest and termination of parental rights in the 90s, Graves spent 15 years in prison. According to prison records, he was a model prisoner. He did not get into conflicts, worked in the library, and took mechanics courses. However, psychologists noted his complete social isolation. He never received any letters, had no visitors, and spent hours drawing the same landscapes in his notebook: tangled mangrove roots and dark water. On May 15, 2008, Lucas Graves was released on parole. And it was at that moment that his trail in official databases was cut off. He did not return to society, did not restore old connections, and did not try to find an official job. The man sold the house he inherited from his parents in Homestead for cash, bought an old pickup truck, and simply disappeared. It took the investigation team 3 days to track his movements through unofficial sources. The trail led to the very bottom of Florida, to the town of Everglades City, a place the locals call the gateway to hell. For those who do not know how to respect the swamp, this is the land of poachers, smugglers, and those who want to never be found. Operatives sent to the local docks were able to gather fragmentary evidence of a man matching Graves' description. The locals knew him by the nickname Ghost. He worked as a boat engine mechanic, taking payment only in cash or food. The owner of an old fish shop in the port told detectives that the man could fix any engine in an hour but never made eye contact or spoke more than 2 words. He knows the maze of the 10,000 islands better than his own 5 fingers, the witness said in the report. Where he lives, even the Coast Guard is afraid to go without a guide. This information confirmed the worst fears. Graves had not only escaped, he had created the perfect hideout for himself in one of the most inaccessible places in the United States. When Detective Rodriguez returned to the hospital with this information, Catherine Jones was able to speak a little more coherently, although the effects of the neurotoxins were still evident. Her face remained partially paralyzed, but her eyes expressed animalistic fear when she heard the name Graves. Under the pressure of the new facts, Catherine broke down and confessed what she had been hiding from the police since the first day of the investigation. It turned out that 30 days before the fatal trip, strange envelopes began to appear in the mailbox of their home. They had no return address and were not stamped by the post office. Someone had dropped them off personally. There were no threats inside in the usual sense. Scenes from life in the swamp were drawn on cheap paper with colored pencils in a primitive, almost childlike manner. A boat among cypress trees, a cabin in the thicket, a girl feeding an alligator. Catherine described to the detectives the last drawing, which came 2 days before the abduction. It depicted 2 female figures, one lying face down in the water, and the other standing in a boat holding the hand of a tall man without a face. Under the picture, only one sentence was written in red pencil: "Blood will always find water." Catherine burned the letters, afraid to scare Amy and destroy the illusion of their perfect life. Amy had never doubted who her parents were, and Catherine was panicked that the truth about her biological father, a criminal, would destroy the girl's psyche. She thought it was a cruel joke or an attempt to blackmail her, and she couldn't imagine that the author of the letters was already right behind her. Catherine's confession forced the investigation to completely reconsider the profile of the perpetrator. This was not a chaotic attack by a maniac, or a chance encounter with a psychopath on the road. It was a cold-blooded, years-long operation to recover property. Lucas Graves didn't just kidnap his biological daughter. He realized a scenario that he had been planning for 18 years. The FBI. Analysts involved in the case drew attention to the particular cruelty and symbolism in the treatment of Catherine. She was not killed, although Graves had every opportunity to do so. She was left alive, but turned into an immovable object, a living buoy in the middle of the swamp. This served a twofold purpose. First, it was pragmatic. The search for the missing woman drew in enormous resources from the police, volunteers, and the Air Force, while hundreds of people combed the square around the car. Graves won 12 precious days to get Amy as far away as possible. Second, it was a message. By leaving Catherine in the state of a chemical doll able to realize everything, but unable to speak, he demonstrated his absolute power. It was revenge for what he believed was her stealing his child a quarter of a century ago. The wide, artificial smile on Catherine's face was his signature, a mockery of the system that once took his daughter from him and the woman who tried to replace her. Investigators realized that they were dealing with a man who lived in his own distorted reality, where the laws of civilization did not apply. Graves was not running away. He was returning home to a world where he was both God and judge. Now the police knew the who and the why. The most difficult question remained: where? An analysis of satellite images of the 10,000 Islands area showed hundreds of small patches of land, straits, and abandoned fishing shacks. It was physically impossible to check them all. But late in the evening of September 1st, the department received a call from the same fish shop owner from Everglades City. He said he remembered one detail he had forgotten during the first conversation. A few months ago, Graves had bought a large batch of canned goods and a can of fuel from him. When the seller asked him why he needed so many supplies, the mechanic smiled for the first time and replied with a strange phrase, I am preparing a nest on Shadow Island, where the Lostman's River flows into the sea. Detective Rodriguez unfolded a map. The Lostman's River was one of the wildest and most remote points on the costa. Real white spot on the map of the search operation. On September 2, 2016, the operational headquarters of the investigation moved from the comfortable offices of Miami directly to the field, to the edge of the Everglades National Park. The information received from the fish store clerk about Shadow Island and the mouth of the Lostman's River became the starting point. The investigation had been missing. However, finding one specific shack in the maze of the 10,000 islands, where land and water constantly change places, was a task bordering on the impossible. Detective Mark Rodriguez brought in the best hydrology and aerial reconnaissance experts for the operation. Hydrologists conducted a detailed analysis of the currents in the area where Catherine Jones was found a week ago. Computer modeling showed that given the water speed and wind direction in the second half of August, an unresisting body could only have been brought in from the south, from the Gulf of Mexico. This narrowed the search area to 3 square miles in the vicinity of the abandoned Lostman's River outpost fishing station, a place that had been officially considered uninhabited since the hurricane of 2005. On September 3rd, at dawn, reconnaissance drones equipped with high-resolution cameras took to the air. The operators spent hours peering at the monitors, scanning the endless green mangrove forests. At 10:15, one of the drones spotted an anomaly. A very regular geometric shape was visible among the chaotic intertwining of branches. It was a roof carefully covered with a layer of fresh moss and camouflage netting, making the building invisible even from a distance of 50 feet. The assault team of a special police unit, reinforced by agents of the FBI, moved to the point on 3 silent boats. The approach to the site was extremely cautious. The men expected traps or armed resistance. The floating shack was safely hidden in the depths of a narrow strait where sunlight hardly ever reached. When the first group stepped onto the rickety wooden flooring, it was dead silence. The door was not locked. There was no one inside. However, an inspection of the room confirmed the worst fears. This was not a temporary hideout for a poacher. It was a house that had been abandoned quite recently, perhaps a few hours before the group's arrival. There was a cup of half-drunk coffee on the table with a film still on it, and a kerosene lampwick barely smoldering in the corner. But what the detectives saw on the walls made them forget about the everyday details. The entire back wall of the main room had been turned into a kind of altar of obsession. It was densely covered with hundreds of photos of Amy Jones. These were not pictures from a family album. They were shots taken with a hidden camera from a great distance. Amy leaving the university. Amy buying coffee. Amy laughing in the park with friends. Amy reading a book on a bench. The dates on the back of some of the photos, written in black marker, indicated that Lucas Graves had started following his biological daughter 4 years ago. He was a shadow that accompanied her throughout her adult life, an invisible watcher, patiently biding his time. On a nearby table, investigators found stacks of medical records. These were stolen or illegally obtained copies of Catherine Jones's medical records. Next to them were printed prescriptions for strong neuroleptics and schemes for combining them with plant poisons. There was also a notebook with detailed notes on the effects of different dosages on the mammalian body. Graves was not improvising. He had been testing his chemical weapons for years, preparing to turn Amy's mother into a living statue. But the key to understanding the perpetrator's motives was his personal diary, found under the mattress on the only bed. These were not the chaotic notes of a madman. It was a manifesto. Graves wrote about Amy not as a person, but as a project. In one of the entries dated a week before the kidnapping, he noted, "She is poisoned by civilization, but her soul is still pure. I will wash this dirt off her. she will become a clean slate on which I will write a new story. She will forget her fake mother and her fake life. He called Catherine the jailer and himself the liberator. The diary revealed his plan, not just to steal the body, but to erase the personality. Graves was convinced that the Amy who was raised by Catherine had to die so that his real daughter could be born. And the proof that this process had already begun was waiting for the police downstairs. While inspecting the floor, one of the operatives noticed that one of the boards was not nailed tightly. When the floorboard was lifted, small cash in the foundations where Graves's most valuable possessions were kept was revealed. There was a neatly folded pile of clothes, jeans, a light blouse, sneakers, and underwear. It was the same outfit that Amy Jones wore when she left the house on August 14th. The clothes were clean, laundered, and folded with meticulous precision, as if they were being prepared for burial or storage in a museum. Next to the modern clothes was another set that made Detective Rodriguez shudder. These were rough, homespun garments hand-sewn from burlap and untreated linen. A simple cut dress similar to the clothes of early settlers or sectarians. Leather sandals, and a hat cask. It was a visual demonstration of what happened in this hut. Amy Jones was brought here as a modern girl, a graduate student, the daughter of Catherine. But she was taken out of here as someone else. The discovery in the underground cache put an end to the hope of finding the girl quickly. Graves did not just hide. He completely changed the appearance of his victim. He took away her name, her history, and even her clothes, replacing them with the scenery of his fictional world, while the SWAT team examined the empty cabin. Detective Rodriguez went out on the dock and looked out at the dark water flowing slowly north. He realized they were at least a day late. The ghost of the swamps had dissolved again, taking with it the clean slate that had once been Amy Jones. Now their path lay far beyond the familiar Everglades swamps, to where the trail was lost forever. But among the debris on the floor, investigators noticed another detail. A crumpled highway map with a bold red marker outlined a forest in a completely different state. While the investigative team led by Detective Rodriguez was inspecting the empty houseboat in the maze of the 10,000 islands, the object of their search was already hundreds of miles north of the Gulf Coast. The events of this period were reconstructed in detail much later. Based on fragmentary witness accounts, CCTV footage from remote gas stations, and the conclusions of forensic psychiatrists who worked with the victim. It was a chronicle not just of physical displacement, but of the complete destruction of a human personality and its replacement with an artificially created construct. Amy Jones was alive, but the girl sitting in the passenger seat of the old pickup truck bore little resemblance to the cheerful graduate student who left home on August 14th. Lucas Graves did not use ropes, handcuffs, or gags to keep her close. His methods were much more sophisticated and terrifying. Amy was in a state of deep chemical submission, using the same cocktail of scopolamine and plant neurotoxins that he had tested on Catherine. Graves developed a special dosage for his daughter. It didn't completely paralyze her muscles, allowing her to move and eat on her own, but it did suppress her will and critical thinking, turning her mind into viscous, malleable clay, according to later reconstructions by psychologists. Graves constantly maintained a certain level of toxins in Amy's blood by giving her medicine every 4 hours. He convinced her that she was seriously ill, that her body was fighting a deadly infection she had picked up in the outside world. But the chemistry was only a tool for the main thing, the implantation of a new reality. Using the girl's amnesia and confusion, Lucas methodically rewrote her memory. He told her a story about a global catastrophe. According to him, while they were in the swamps, an unknown epidemic swept the world or a great war broke out. The details changed, but the essence remained the same. Civilization had collapsed. Cities were burning, and people were killing each other for food. He, her real father, had saved her at the last moment. In this distorted reality, Katherine Jones was given the role of the jailer, a cruel woman who kidnapped Amy as a child and poisoned her with lies and the toxins of the cities. Graves spoke convincingly, with a fanatical belief in his own words, and Amy's disoriented brain, deprived of access to objective information, began to perceive this as the only truth. Their route was laid out on secondary roads, avoiding major highways and police posts. They traveled along U.S. Route 27 through the heart of rural Florida, stopping only at abandoned campgrounds and cheap motels that did not require documents and took cash. One such stop was the old Blind Hollow Motel near the town of Sebring. Its owner later told investigators that he had seen a strange couple on September 18th. The man called himself John and introduced the girl as his daughter, Sarah. The witness noted that the girl looked extremely exhausted and was staring at one point. When the owner asked if she needed medical attention, the man abruptly replied that they were on their way to see a specialist and that she was having seizures after the accident. The scariest part of the situation was that Amy didn't try to ask for help. When Graves stepped away for a moment to the front desk, she sat motionless, clutching a water bottle. Later, she would remember this moment as a dream. It seemed to her that there were enemies around, infected with the virus, and only her father could protect her. The fear of the outside world that Lucas instilled in her was stronger than her desire to escape. It was during this trip that Amy's transformation into Sarah was completed. At one of the stops in the woods, Graves cut her long hair with a hunting knife, leaving her with short, uneven strands. He burned her last clothes, replacing them with plain cotton garments bought at a used clothing store. Looking in the rearview mirror, Amy no longer recognized herself. The woman she had been, a graduate student, a photographer, a daughter of Katherine, was dissolving under the influence of the drugs. In her place was a frightened child, completely dependent on her rescuer. By early October, they reached their final goal, the Ocala National Forest. It is a vast tract of nearly 400,000 acres known for its dense pine forests, karst, lakes, and bears. Graves knew these places as well as the Everglades swamps. Here, in a remote part of the forest, away from the marked hiking trails, he prepared what he called the Ark. It was an old, partially dirt-covered World War II bunker that had once been used by the military for training and then abandoned and forgotten off the maps. Graves had found it years earlier, restored the ventilation, and brought in supplies of canned food, water, and fuel for the generator. It was the perfect place to live after the end of the world he had imagined for. Amy, when the pickup stopped among the tall pines and Graves, turned off the engine. There was absolute silence. He led Amy out of the truck, holding her hand like a little girl. Ahead, camouflaged by shrubbery, he could see a dark entrance into the ground, a rusty hatch leading into a concrete belly. Graves looked at Amy, his eyes shining with triumph. He told her they were finally home, where no one would ever find them. Amy, whose mind was clouded by another dose of the toxin, nodded meekly. She believed she was going down to the shelter to escape death, not realizing that she was actually going down into her own grave, where she was to spend the rest of her life in complete darkness. But Graves made one fatal mistake. A few hours before arriving in the woods, at a gas station in the town of Palatka, he threw an empty package of a specific medication, one he bought only by prescription, into a trash can. This small piece of cardboard found by a cleaner set off a chain of events that could not be stopped. As the heavy bunker hatch creaked shut behind Amy, cutting her off from sunlight hundreds of miles away, Detective Rodriguez's phone vibrated with the message they had been waiting for nearly 2 months. On October 5, 2016, at 3:15 in the morning, an automated facial recognition system being tested by state police in northern Florida sounded an alarm. A surveillance camera at a 24-hour gas station in the small town of Palatka captured a man buying for 20-liter cans of diesel fuel and several bags of vegetable seeds. despite the fact that the man was wearing a low-brimmed cap. The program identified him with a 98% probability as Lucas Graves. However, it wasn't him that caught the operator's attention, but the passenger seat of his pickup truck. The figure of a young girl could be seen through the dirty glass. She was sitting motionless, looking straight ahead. Her once long hair had been roughly cut to the roots, which radically changed her appearance. But a distinctive scar above her eyebrow allowed experts to confirm that it was Amy Jones. She did not look like a hostage looking for rescue. She looked like a person who had accepted her fate. An analysis of the car's route indicated that Graves was headed toward the Ocala National Forest, specifically the area of the old abandoned Juniper Creek sawmill. This place, closed in the 80s, was notorious for a network of underground utilities and tunnels, built by the military during World War II to store ammunition. At 6 o'clock in the morning on October 6th, a combined team of the FBI and police special forces surrounded the perimeter of the sawmill. The operation was conducted in complete silence. Snipers took up positions on the roofs of the dilapidated workshops, and assault teams prepared to break through. At 7:10, when the first rays of the sun touched the tops of the pine trees, the assault began. An armored vehicle kicked in the gate of the hangar where Graves' pickup truck was parked. However, the building was empty. Thermal imagers detected movement underground. The criminal, anticipating the possibility of a raid, tried to use the old ventilation shaft system to get to the river, where he probably had a boat hidden. The pursuit moved into tight concrete corridors where absolute darkness reigned. The capture team moved quickly, focusing on the echoes of footsteps ahead. After 200 yards, the tunnel led to the surface in a deep ravine overgrown with bushes. It was there, near the rusty exit grate, that the final scene of this drama took place. The SWAT team intercepted the fugitives 10 feet from the forest. Lucas Graves, realizing that there was no turning back, held Amy close to him, using her as a human shield. He didn't threaten her with a weapon. He held her hand like a parent holds a child in danger. According to the agent's testimony, Graves shouted in her ear, "Don't believe them. They're lying. These are the same people who killed your mother. They've come to take us to the camp." His voice was full of the sincere desperation of a fanatic who believes his own lies. Amy looked completely confused. She looked from the armed men in black uniforms to her father, and her eyes showed genuine terror of her rescuers. When the FBI negotiator stepped forward, he lowered his weapon and spoke loudly and clearly. "Amy, it's over. We're taking you to your mom." To Catherine, the girl's reaction shocked everyone present. She pulled away from the agent, clinging to Graves, and shouted in a trembling, broken voice, "My name is Sarah. Leave my dad alone. Get away from us." At that moment, it became clear how deeply the poison of manipulation had penetrated her mind. She defended her executioner, considering him her only protector in a hostile world. Taking advantage of the emotional peak of the moment, one of the Special Forces soldiers who had flanked her used a stun gun. 2 probes hit Graves in the back just as he reached for his belt, where, as it turned out, a loaded revolver was hidden. The man fell to the ground in convulsions. Amy rushed to him, screaming, trying to shield him from the police with her body. She had to be pulled away by force while she hysterically called for Daddy and begged them not to kill him. Physically, Amy was saved. But the real tragedy unfolded 48 hours later in a room at a rehabilitation center in Miami. Catherine Jones, who was still in a wheelchair due to muscle atrophy, saw her daughter for the first time after almost 2 months of hell. She stretched out her arms to Amy, crying with happiness. But the girl did not take a step toward her. Amy sat on the bed with her legs tucked up and looked at the woman who raised her with cold alienation and distrust. There was no recognition in her eyes. "You're the jailer," Amy said quietly, echoing Graves' words. "You stole me. I know everything. For Catherine, these words were a blow worse than any physical injury. Lucas Graves had achieved his goal. He could not take Amy away physically, but he managed to kill her memory and love for her mother, replacing them with a fictional story about Sarah. The trial of Lucas Graves lasted only 3 weeks and ended in May 2017. It took the jury less than 2 hours to reach a guilty verdict on all counts, including kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, inflicting grievous bodily harm, and the use of illegal psychotropic substances. Graves pleaded not guilty. In his final statement, he said that the trial was a farce organized by the system to separate him from his daughter. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, plus an additional 30 years. For Catherine Jones, the verdict brought no relief. She devoted her life to the struggle to get her daughter back, not from Graves' captivity, but from the captivity of her own consciousness. Amy's rehabilitation process was long and painful. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with a complex form of Stockholm Syndrome, exacerbated by medication and artificially implanted false memories. Years passed. The memory of Amy's real past came back to her in flashes and fragments, but the whole picture of her personality was never fully restored. She learned to trust Catherine again, but their relationship lost its former warmth and lightness forever. The shadow of Sarah, the personality her biological father had created, in dark motel rooms and bunkers stayed with her forever. Amy would often wake up at night with nightmares in which bad people were trying to take her away from her father. And she had to remind herself that this was not true. The Tamiami Trail kidnapping case has been included in criminology and psychology textbooks as a chilling example of how fragile the human psyche truly is. It proved that isolation, fear, and the distorted authority of a parental figure can rewrite a person's history, forcing them to abandon those who love them the most. The Everglades swamps returned the Bodies, but they forever retained a part of the souls of those who dared to look into their darkness.